Well, hello and welcome to Why Be Platform Agnostic for Virtual Events. My name is Roger Corville, and welcome to another episode of V2's Thought Leader Conversation Series. And here's my opening question for you. Why does that even matter, and what should you be thinking about? Well, you probably know there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all software, and because thinking through the issues that we're going to be talking about today is really important, it will help you think more strategically and execute more precisely, even if, or particularly if, you feel like you're stuck with what the company gave you. And you are in good company today. With me today again is my fellow friend and industry old-timer, co-founder and CEO of Virtual Venues, Aaron Cole, who, like a bunch of us here at Virtual Venues, was himself born into this industry in the very birthplace of a virtual event management, right here in Portland, Oregon. That's kind of a crazy thought. Welcome, Aaron.
Yes, sir. Hi, Roger. Good to see you.
Well, Aaron, what do we even mean? Let's just set the table. What do we even mean by platform agnostic? And then maybe why is that important?
Got it. I think that's a great way to start. And actually, maybe even to look at it from a higher level, I think one of the first things that we need to acknowledge, and you even kind of touched on this just when you started, Roger, is that it might be hard for us old farts to believe this, but this industry has now been active for over 2 decades, and so we are very much as an industry in a mature market. And what I mean by that is the adoption is out there across the industry and industries. Feature wise, we have rolled into and developed, generally accepted functionality and norms on what people are expecting to do within specific areas of, attending an event online. But I think the biggest one is market fragmentation, where in a mature market, obviously there's going to be that diversification. So there's going to be differentiation in terms of what platforms are doing and where they're going. That's the big part of the equation that I think is really super important. The market is always going to be continually pushed forward by technology, by developments. That's never going to stop. But when you first take a step back and kind of realize that, it's that fragmentation of the market that's going to be key. So having said that, what we typically mean by platform agnostic is essentially that, again, because of that fragmentation, there is no and there never will be one set perfect console or platform that is going to solve and address every possible use case that you could be looking to accomplish when you're looking to do a virtual event. It's just not there. And so therefore, being agnostic, meaning not being tied to one set piece of technology, not being tied to, the only thing that your company might provide, Zoom or whatever it happens to be, that buys you a ability to kind of almost cherry pick what is going to work best for you and what has the best feature set and functionality for you for that specific use case that you might be looking to solve. That's where we try to hit as a company, as V2, being platform agnostic and really trying to kind of look at that industry in a wide angle to be able to deliver that kind of specialized solution to our clients.
You're going to make me feel like an old timer, bro. Been around for a couple decades. Well, true. I started in 1999 and we were happy if people had 56K modems. And it's amazing how seriously, back then, it's hard to even imagine. Conferencing tools didn't have like registration, right?
No,
the company that I went to work for back then built the very first registration tool around Huge something deal. Like this, and we'd have nobody knew about this stuff, right? We'd do an event for IBM, and then our phone would ring, going, "Hey, what the heck was that?"
How do I submit
okay, here's your useless
online?
factoid of the day. When did AT&T introduce the first video phone? I think it was in the early 70s.
Is that right? Really?
That's kind of the difference. And by the way, if you're listening or watching, keep an eye out, because we're also going to be doing a future of this industry episode here soon, and talk about both what's the big picture and what might we expect in 2023. But it's useful to remember that it takes a while for scientists call it the diffusion of innovations, right? It takes a while for that stuff to get into the market. But to Aaron's point, the differentiation is in the details. And we tend to think, oh, I use Zoom or WebEx or Adobe or GoTo or something every day for my regular meetings. And we think that's the paradigm. Oh, well, I attended something on GoToWebinar once, and we think that's the paradigm. But the differentiation is in the details, right?
Right.
So, which is your point. And I think this next section of what we'll be talking about, both will be fairly lengthy because there's a lot of details, but also pretty illuminating. Just out of curiosity, what kinds of issues even drive people to begin searching for something other than what the company provides or what they use day to day for meetings?
Yeah, no, great question. And you're right. That's a very deep topic. It does depend on where the goals of the client are. And sometimes, our clients, when they come to us, they start to realize, or they start to acknowledge and understand that they're kind of running aground a little bit with where they're wanting to do things, especially if we're talking about marketing and thought leadership and HR and stuff like that, which is the bread and butter of most of, our clients' use cases. They kind of hit the ground, and that's where we have to kind of take a step back and assess some of these main important points about what is going to be the best solution.
Yeah. Well, and let me acknowledge one tension up front as we start moving into some of those feature details that then facilitate or enable other ways of connecting and engaging with people, right? Part of this tension is I don't even know what's out there.
Right.
Meaning I don't even know the right questions to ask, right? Some people come and they know kind of, oh, I saw this networking thing, and my, Zoom meetings doesn't let me do this kind of virtual business speed dating thing. Do you have that? Right. Sometimes some people come knowing what they're looking for because they saw something cool.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, hey, I just want to increase the level of connectedness and experience with my attendees. And it's not their language, but I don't even know what I'm looking for.
Right.
I don't even know what's out there.
Totally. Yeah. They can paint the picture. Or to your point, I think that's a great way that things get adopted is maybe they see it at a conference somewhere and they're like, wow, I'd really love to do that for my next ... whatever that meeting is going to be. Absolutely. When we're looking at that kind of a design, again, going back to kind of like that higher level kind of definition of walking through the steps to define what the needs are, the use cases, the functionality, the first thing that we're looking at and defining with our clients is kind of what we think of as a one-to-one versus a one-to-many design. And that's kind of like, for us, that's like the middle fence that either a platform is going to be on one side or it's going to be on the other side. One-to-one meaning that we're talking more collaboration. We're talking where more training events where everyone is going to share their webcam. You're going to have things like breakouts. You're going to have polling and high levels of communication and collaboration, but you're not going to have 500 people in that type of a design.
All with their
because
video
it's just
on
not functional.
and phones unmuted.
Right, exactly. Yep. Mute. Exactly. So that would be like one-to-one. And the other side of that fence would be like a one-to-many design. And that's where you've got more like company all hands and stuff where you're focusing then more on impact. You're focusing then more on content and message delivery, where maybe you've got the company CEO that's going to be speaking to the audience, or there's a large marketing thing. Doesn't even necessarily have to be large, but to the design of that, where there by definition is less interaction, but more of a reliance on that distribution and that delivery of content. And it's the way that content is delivered becomes exponentially more important in terms of the user interface and the attendee reactions to what they're being presented and how that looks and feels to them.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that we start with. Yeah.
I think about that as the tension between formal and informal, right? It can be a lot less formal when it's 4 people around the conference room table.
Right.
And it's has to be a lot more formal if it's 400 people.
Exactly. Just by design.
And here's a useful analogy that I think might help as we go through and even talk about some of these features. Just like dynamics of interpersonal communication change when you go from 5 people to 15 people, let alone from 15 to 50 or 500. Just
Hmm.
like those dynamics change in person, they change online as well, right? Which is part of
Absolutely.
why there's no one size fits all. And if the big broad swath of from GoTo or Zoom or WebEx is, well, here's for meetings and here's for events, that even still is kind of very general relative to a lot of the specifics that people are really start beginning to go, oh, yeah, no, we want to do more than just that.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. That's a big definition. And again, another way, even just looking at it from a standpoint of like Zoom meetings compared to Zoom webinars, that's a great example of that differentiation of those two different designs. That's where we start out with our clients. Exactly right.
So pick a tool and or something, a feature that illustrates some of those discovery moments. What are some of those things that people come to you with, and
Yeah.
for whatever reason their ability to use desire to use pre-recorded video takes them in this direction, or because the way
Right.
they want to handle hybrid takes them in this direction? Just
Right. Yep.
pick one and
Got
go.
it. So once we've made that distinction of where on that fence we're going to go, then we start drilling into some of the more important functionalities and feature sets that are available of particular consoles. Some of these are technically based, and so we're thinking through from a process of how does it work from an attendee adoption standpoint. Some of them, to your point, Roger, are absolutely content based. So one of the biggest ones, uh, a little bit less so now, but it was a big deal a couple years ago, in terms of there being either a client download, so meaning that when you attend an event, there's a little file that is going to be downloaded on every attendee's computer, versus natively streaming in a browser, which is what we refer to as HTML5. All HTML5 is just basically the ability to see and hear video and audio from natively within a browser. You used to have to be able to adopt a plugin for older languages that were used to design websites prior to HTML5, like Adobe Flash. That was a plugin that had to go into a website to allow video to be able to play and to let you actually hear the audio. That natively can stream within HTML5. And so where that is important to us, for example, if we are working with a financial client, for example, where their audience is likely to be people that are going to be in larger financial institutions, there's a very good chance, there's a very good possibility that at least some of that population, their machines are not going to allow the ability to download a piece of software onto their computers. They're locked down. And that might very well be a pretty negative impact for them being able to attend the meeting if there's not a browser-based solution that they can join on. And so that's one of the questions that we're going to ask is, who is your audience? Who are you trying to get into your event? And let's take a look at that and get real smart about what we think their adoption of whatever we're recommending is going to be to make that decision. And the last thing I was going to say, from the download standpoint, there's obviously a lot of benefits from a downloaded console as well too. I think that's why it's a little bit less of an issue now, but it's something that we want to ask and something that we want to understand. Just as an example of what are some of those differences that we need to start thinking about.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I like how we started with the feature and then up leveled it to kind of the business use cases in,
Yeah.
well, who's my audience, and really, do we know them? Because it kind of even leads into one of the other points that you made here. Um, let's be generous. In certain industry segments, there are more digital immigrants than digital natives,
Yes.
right? I
Yes.
wish I was lying about this, but literally in the last month, I had somebody on an event that I was producing who went, I lost Zoom, and was still connected, right? And had simply, clicked on a browser
Yeah.
which came up over Zoom and thought, right?
Yes.
So it's not right or wrong. It's just
No.
an understanding of going, wait a minute, how do we think? If we want to think like DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, part of
Yes.
inclusiveness might be going, hey, it's okay.
Right.
Half of
Right.
our audience is baby boomers and older, and they might not be quite as whatever as if your
Exactly.
audience is all using TikTok. So
Exactly. And it's not right or wrong. It's just understanding and getting really smart and serious about what and who your audience is.
right.
Another one that again, has been massive in our industry in the past couple of years is mobile compatibility. That's flipping the spectrum completely on the
Huge.
opposite side
Yeah.
of that generational definition. But so many young professionals, who are the technology natives, who grew up with a phone and everything, um, they are expecting to be able to jump into a webinar, whatever it happens to be, from their mobile device with minimal problems, minimal confusion, and have that be delivered to them within that device.
Yeah.
That is another one. And so if we know what degree your audience and where your demographics are, that's going to be something we're going to want to talk about, and make sure that we're working with something that's going to address that side of the spectrum.
Yeah. And honestly, sometimes that might mean us making some reasonable estimates or assumptions with you, because
Mm-hmm.
honestly, sometimes your audience doesn't think about it that way. I mean, to
Right.
be fair, I've literally
Right.
in another one of those use cases, this was a little longer ago than a month, but where a significant chunk of the audience were in on their iPads, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't think of that as a mobile device, even though it's running a mobile operating system. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, in
Right.
terms of how do we guide people through an experience, became a thing
Right.
because it didn't operate the same way that Zoom operates in that particular case for this client. Doesn't operate exactly the same way as what you do day to day. And in fact, there's even a phrase for that called normalcy bias or normality bias, which is,
Mm-hmm.
hey, here's what I know normally, therefore everything's like that.
Right.
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 And just because
Exactly.
you and the people inside your company use Zoom or GoToMeeting or something every single day doesn't mean that's what is being
Right.
experienced more broadly.
Right. Right. And again, going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best solution to get your goals accomplished, and that's again going to those higher level kind of discussions. Exactly right. Right.
So let me just pull out one of the more esoteric ones, because we could go on and on for lots of features, but I think there are some of these that are forward leaning a little, but they are also
Mm-hmm.
really important when we think about unique ways that people may have not thought about creating a connection or some kind of an
Mm-hmm.
experience. What comes to mind is like the way On24 has created a bridge for hybrid audiences. Talk
Yes.
about that.
Yeah. Love that. And I thought that's something that's been out for a little bit of time. And I think it's one of the smartest innovations, because that goes back to one of the things I know, Roger, we were talking a while ago about in terms of, the buzzword in our industry is hybrid, getting past COVID, understanding that everyone wants to get back to that physical environment, but there is such a demand and a desire for people to have some sort of a virtual component to catch the people that aren't willing to travel, or to catch the people that might just be interested in only viewing something online. They understand they need to do that. And so the smart design steps are finding ways to minimize that difference between virtual and online as much as you can. And the feature sets that you're referring to, Roger, through On24 are very much designed to do that. And so one of those that I think is brilliant is the ability of QR codes, which again, that's been something that's been pushed out fairly widely in a lot of different markets. For this use case, you have registration on On24. You have all of that kind of a design, the virtual components of it on On24. In the physical event, in the physical meeting, you have a QR code that, as you are entering into the event, you as that participant scan that QR code. That automatically loads a browser designed version of the On24 console on your phone. It strips out the media player, so you're not going to see or hear what's on the stage, and you wouldn't want to, because you're going to be physically in the room, and that's obviously not going to work. So that's stripped out. But what is provided for that physical attendee, the ability to vote on polls, the ability to ask questions, the ability to download resources, all of those really cool functions that the virtual audience has, now is immediately available for the inline physical audience. And that is really, really smart. And the other thing that also ties to is for our clients, a lot of the value of doing virtual events from a lead gen standpoint and a thought leadership standpoint is the data. Wanting to track and gather and lead score and action and find actionable items for the data that you're gathering. The minute that attendee scans that QR code and they're going to go in, you have a record of that, and you have a digital track, a digital pathway footprint that you can follow that attendee and what they did, just like they were in a virtual event. Huge.
I'll tell you one reason why I love that. Because, for a long time, Aaron and I have been doing this for way too long. But for a long time, part of what we do as a service organization is help people achieve a particular something by with labor and smarts, right? And that's part of what we do. Example, I spoke, I was the keynote presenter for a conference in Sydney, Australia. And even though I've been to Sydney a couple times, this time I was doing it remotely. Well, they piped me in, and to increase audience interaction, there's about 300 people in the main auditorium. I talked them into switching from GoToMeeting to GoToWebinar so that we could use the polling, right? Because GoToWebinar has polls and GoToMeeting doesn't. And then invited everybody in the auditorium to download GoToWebinar on their phone so they could vote in a poll, right? Yeah. So there's a way we could do a workaround, which was kind of cool. And in fact, interestingly worked, even though probably pretty risky to have 200 or 300 people in one room all hit the same hotel Wi-Fi at the same time. That's probably that is often a risky move. But I'll say this, it was kind of cool because now there was some kind of a connection that brought people together. But we had to do a workaround, right? We had to go tell people that, as opposed to what you're talking about, you could print it up on the little stand of the board, whether it's in the program or on the board that's on there when that says this is what sessions are in this breakout room. As they're walking in, QR code, bam, they're in. They get the materials. They can vote in a poll or type in a question or that kind of thing. Exactly. And I love that because it helps bridge the in-person experience and the online experience.
Exactly.
Meaning, because now people could effectively chat with each other, right?
Right.
You can otherwise you've got separate audiences having very separate experiences, and there's no way for me online to chat with you who are on site.
Exactly.
And that just closes some of that gap. So I love.
No, I agree. I love that and it's powerful. And where that is going is, again, really trying to, as you just said, blur that line, So like using a boom set, which is now a subset of Hopin, where you can do the same thing, QR code, you can scan their badge and that registers who that person is. Again, trying to find ways to make it seamless. That's another thing that we've kind of been talking about a little bit here from a user standpoint. I don't want it to be hard. I just want to do a single click and then I'm where I need to be, or I've got the software that I need on my smartphone, making it seamless, but then also increasing that collaboration. So even potentially to the standpoint of, if I'm physically in an event, being able to network and see who is attending this event virtually, and being able to reach out and potentially set up a one-to-one video conference or a quick chat, kind of like I'm pulling you to the side of after the keynote or whatever, with that virtual audience member, making that connection. That's pretty cool. And it gets to that point of providing solutions for people to collaborate and have that data, that messaging that you as a marketer or you as a event manager are needing to get across, making that completely seamless.
So let's keep running on the theme of connection. So one of the things that we know is a difference between online and on-site for a longer event, what we often call a virtual event, multi-session, if not multi-day, right? Here's the keynote. Here are some, 3 breakout rooms in the Mount Hood room and the St. Helens room and that kind of thing. One of the things that we miss is that informal part of running into somebody and getting to know them because we're both picking up a donut at the same time, right?
Right.
You just mentioned Hopin. Well, that's one of those cool little things in Hopin that a lot of people frankly don't even realize is a possibility because it's not in a typical typical meeting platform or even typical webinar platform that we use day to day.
Right. It's you could think of it as networking. You can think of it in a tongue-in-cheek method as speed dating, but whole idea is to provide an ability for people to seamlessly connect. And what Hopin has done, which again I think is very, very forward leaning, is that their networking ability allows you, if you're an attendee and you want to do this, you go to the networking area and almost in a round robin fashion, the platform will place you in a virtual room with another person, that just like you're picking up a donut, you might bump into physically at the conference, and you've got a 3-minute conversation with that person. You can choose to exchange contact information. You can choose to
And that's built
extend
into
it
the
by a couple
platform.
minutes, and that's within the
That's
platform.
not just you and me
Huge.
going, hey, find me
Yeah.
on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's all within that environment, which we haven't even talked about that, but that's another massive, massive driver, keeping it all within a single environment so they don't wander away. But you've got that ability to connect and network with someone. The other cool thing that I think is really smart is that you can also set up parameters that are either via like ticket types, or even if someone on your registration page, you're having them select what their profession is, IT or legal or whatever. You can set that up so that when you are networking or speed dating, the system can bring in people that match the profile parameters that you have designed it to be. So you're going to be talking with an IT person if you're IT, or legal if you're legal. Again, it's a great idea to increase that level of interaction and make it more meaningful, for who is doing it. So another
You
great
know
one.
what? That subject of ID, right? That self-identification when someone registers for your thing is germane throughout the life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe let's even walk through that life cycle, right? How does that touch down with registration?
Yeah.
Right? Example, I want, like a conference, I want somebody to register once and then have access to whatever sessions. I don't want them to have to register a whole bunch of times. Or how does that then happen internally, like during the live event, like those, networking, speed dating kinds of things, or even post-event reporting, and how that, did somebody go back and watch the archive, the recording of something? That's the magic key for you being able to not only provide better experience along the way, but also to better report on and then follow up and serve people accordingly. Start with registration. What are some of the cool things happening with registration these days?
Yeah, well, there's a lot, and I would also kind of reinforce what you just said a minute ago, that registration's the first big lift that has to happen, whether it's a virtual environment or even if it's a webinar or whatever. It's the first thing that has to be physically show ready for people to register, obviously. And it can be a tendency for people to just be coming at it from the mindset of, I've got to get this done. I need to push my reg out by Friday. I got to get it done this week, and just bang it out and have it up there. But to your point, Roger, there are so many elements and aspects of it that we really, really want to think through and diagnose and design and come up with. That might be a little bit of a mistake in hindsight if we're just banging something out just for the sake of getting a reg page up so that you can cross that off your list. So defining demographics, defining even ticket types, or what an attendee is going to be exposed to in a virtual environment. So there might very well be different tracks of content that, your IT people, again, are probably not going to be interested in viewing the legal and compliance portion of a virtual conference. Maybe we don't even need to show that legal track to the people that register as IT, for example. Maybe we just want to present to them the content that's relevant for them, differentiating that out and making that be more actionable and more functional for your attendees. That requires process, and that requires a lot of pre-thought and energy, but it's hugely important. And it goes all the way through, again, to the networking like we were just talking about. You mentioned reporting and the archives. Being able to set that up, you're almost like setting yourself up for success versus a little bit of a mediocre outcome at the end. The final thing that I think is also pretty important is, someone registers for your event, you've got their buy-in at that point. They've read through your materials. They're hitting that submit button, and they're opting in to attend your event. Your communications back to that attendee, massively important. And we don't just want to just go, okay, that means a 2-week reminder, a 1-week reminder, a 1-hour reminder for everybody. Boom. Okay, we're done. Let's move on. You don't want to do that.
Here's one of my favorites. To me, it's a question of like, people connection is like, do you see me?
Yes.
Right? It's like,
right.
I can't tell you. I mean, I seriously cannot tell you how many times this has happened to me. Hey, I get this follow-up email from a salesperson going, hey, it looks like you attended our webinar last week. No,
No, I
I
didn't.
registered, but I didn't attend. Well,
Right.
so, right. So it was
Yep.
like, yeah, you don't know
No, I
Jack.
didn't.
So
Yep. Yep.
I'm not responding. Oh, here's another feature in registration that I think is kind of cool, and it's kind of forward thinking, but WebEx events,
Yes.
right, can begin to apply a set of user defined rules, like one of the rules that you come up with, for instance, even in the live context, where you could say, hey, we only want we want you to prioritize, of all the questions coming into the questions manager, we want you to prioritize those that have VP or higher in the title.
Yeah.
Or those kinds of
Yes.
things, right? Most people
Right.
don't realize that, some little thing like that, and maybe that's really important to you. Maybe it doesn't make any difference to you.
Yeah.
But it very well could be that some little thing, and that gets back to where Aaron started. Hey, just tell me about who you're trying to reach, and
Right.
more importantly,
Right.
let's talk about your goals, because some people
Right.
go, "Whoa, you mean I could prioritize the questions of the more important people in the room? Important to some
Yep.
people, not important to some people, but it's one of those tiny little details that can make a big difference for your big event,
Right.
regardless of whether you use WebEx on an ongoing basis or not."
Right. Right. Let's take the time. Let's invest that energy up front to really, again, get smart about what your goals are and who your audience is and how they're best going to resonate with what you're looking to do. Because that really is what drives the entire process. Exactly right.
Any other feature or feature type that comes to mind?
Let's see. I think we've talked through a lot of them. Another one I was just thinking about a minute ago. Another thing that is really smart is thinking through and recognizing the value of your content that you are painstakingly creating in a virtual environment or a virtual webinar series or whatever, and being able to come up with ways to repurpose that content. I think that's a big one too. So, there's a value to that. You are creating content that is going to live in perpetuity online, regardless of what your product is or your messages or something, whatever you're designing your event to be wrapped around. The value of that content that you've created is potentially significant. And so thinking through ahead of time, what are the things that I want to do with the content once it's done? Do I just want to set it up and just have an archive just be playing for anyone that comes and trickles back? That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Let's just think that through and decide which is the best way to do it. Or do I maybe want to find ways to break that content up and add chapters to it, or even chop some of it up and have little bits and elements of a particular event or video that you've created be a part of a social media campaign, or be available in a separate channel that you are then therefore exponentially increasing potentially your eyeballs on it and potentially the value that's coming back to you as a content manager. That's another one too. And again, it goes back to that whole initial thought process, design ahead of actually building.
Yeah, no, that you make a great point, because there are a number of things. I mean, even though we've pointed out along the way here, we've pointed out some features that are fairly unique to WebEx or On24 or something like that. Sooner or later, those kinds of things tend to bubble their way out in a lot of platforms.
Yes.
But even then, sometimes the tiny details of how it gets done, right? It's not just the existence of the feature. It's then how does that affect production level performance, or speed to market, or the ability to, as you pointed out, continue to gather data or provide people other aspects of an experience. The devil's in the details. I mean, not in a bad way, in an opportunity way.
Right.
But that's I'll just be honest, one of the challenges that I find is a struggle between marketing, who wants to have some nice little clean website that just has, a couple pictures and 4 words of bullet points, and all of the stuff down below the surface of the iceberg that's down below the surface, where where it's like,
Runs pretty deep.
yeah, there's a big difference here. Is
Yeah.
there one in
Yep.
particular that comes to mind where it's like, oh yeah, at the production level, two platforms do the same thing, but one is sure a lot more elegant?
Yeah. Let me think about a particular use case, but I think to your point, that's getting back to this whole idea of being platform agnostic. That's where I think one of the strengths that when you have that kind of higher level view, but then mastery of every type of technology that you are using, that's where that really becomes valuable, and that's where it really becomes important to, in this case, our clients, who are wanting to make sure that whatever event they happen to be doing on whatever the platform is utilizing the technology to the absolute most effective nature, and then also having that technology, again, what we usually say, become transparent so that it's best adopted by the audience. There's a million of them, from like an ability of some platforms to have a virtual switcher that is actually natively embedded in the platform. So instead of just having the system essentially auto detect what audio signal is coming from a webcam, and boom, that's a webcam that everyone sees, which again, that works, that's fine, it no problem. But potentially having the ability to have a switcher and an engineer that's actually controlling and switching what webcams are going to be visible by the audience. And are we doing a Brady Bunch? And who's going to be at the top left corner of that Brady Bunch, for example? Maybe I want my CEO to be right up top there because of his presence, and I'm going to be bringing in people as we go through, as an example. Having that ability can be pretty important.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Q&A functionality as well too, and every Q&A function works generally the same. People ask a question, you see the question, you can answer it back one to many, and everyone sees it. You can answer it back privately, and that's the guardrails of the Q&A function. But there are so many different little variances with every platform in terms of how can you rank them, how can you prioritize them, can you edit the question to say ask this instead, or can you group them together in a common question?
Can you
create a
assign it
folder
to the person that you want to answer that question?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a million of those things, and that gets back to that mastery of the technology, but more importantly, adopting it to what's going to be important to that particular use case.
Yeah. And to be totally fair, I kind of threw that question out of left field at you, and we hadn't talked about that in advance. A couple things that come to mind for me. One of our clients, I won't name them, who wants beautiful registration pages, but also wants to use Zoom. Well, you don't get beautiful registration pages out of Zoom. I don't care what you do. So, right. So putting up a web page that's a beautiful registration page that then passes data on through to Zoom and makes it all work is
another example.
Is one example of.
Right.
Sometimes there are workarounds. Sometimes it's something behind the scenes, like what Aaron just talked about with regard to, some little thing like we want to be able to highlight the right video at the right time in the right way is an important thing. And I don't know about you, but if I was not in this industry, besides, even if I thought I knew all the questions to ask, there are so many of those things that you really don't discover until you like own it and get into it. And now you might know one platform really deeply, but are you going to have to go make an investment in a platform and know that one really deeply to figure out that one thing is a real pain in your backside, and that a different vendor solved that a lot more elegantly is one of the challenges, right? And again,
you don't know what you don't know.
Right. Yeah. So, we kind of started with the premise, which is actually something we brought it up because it's something that we hear pretty commonly. I'm stuck with what the company gives me. Right. And oftentimes we think about that as like, well, wait a minute, you're leaving money on the table because you providing not just content, but an experience to an audience is part of how you get and keep them engaged, or right. Because if they don't get and stay engaged, they don't continue to vote in polls or want to come back and look at the archive or those kinds of things that produce the data that you're looking for to fuel the sales team or whatever your business model is. But talk about Leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
When we use that phrase, what is it? What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's a great phrase, and I would even spin that to even uh, rephrase it slightly. It's not necessarily even just what money are you leaving on the table, but what features and functionality are you leaving on the table? And again, you don't know what you don't know, especially if you are within a corporate environment where this is the product that IT has contracted with. This is the way we do things, and this is how it works. You know, you would be less likely to be able to have that visibility of something new that's coming into the market that's a very cool idea, some of the stuff we talked about, unless maybe you do happen to run into it in a conference or something, and then you're thinking of that process of how do I get that if I know my company corporate infrastructure is a WebEx shop, but I'm looking at some other higher level functionality. That's hard. And that's where I feel we, as a platform agnostic by design company, I feel like that's one of the larger strengths that we can provide to people. It's our responsibility. It's our job to keep our heads above the water of the market, to see what is coming down the pike, and to see what other companies are doing, and to see how other companies are even using the same technology, slightly different, but still achieving maybe a slightly different effect that maybe other clients might benefit from. It's on us to go through that and to learn and to really recommend and help our clients understand some new things that are coming on, some things that are going to be possibly helpful for them, that can help possibly get them past and continue that forwarding evolution and that forwarding process of always improving what you're looking to do.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, here's one example that comes to mind. Literally, a client I was working with we're in financial services, where they wanted to lean forward a little bit, and the nature of the event. Well, I'll just put it out there, right? A couple years ago, Zoom had some bad press around security,
Yeah.
and never mind that they patched it in probably 2.3 hours, and then it wasn't an issue, and people like to talk about that kind of stuff, right? But
Yep.
but the IT department, God love them, we're not letting that blah blah blah. So
Right.
So when we work with a client, for instance, one of our responsibilities, I think, is to be not only aware of what your individual situation is. Okay, here's what we want to do, and that it's going to take you months in a security review. I literally worked with a client, spent 75 grand on just a security review for one event. But right, understanding what's the environment, what are the legal requirements, what are the data requirements, the whether that's how the platform responds to or deals with canned spam or crud. I'm having
I know where you're
right?
going with it.
The
Yeah. There's a
European
lot.
and
There's a lot
California,
there.
right? Data,
Right.
but part of the challenge is to then say, how do we help you achieve your goals and make your boss happy, right?
Right.
Because that doesn't mean we want to go skirt IT. In the case that I was just talking about, the blessing came from IT. It was just like,
Right.
it's okay. We vetted your vendor to do that.
Right.
But that's a whole lot different than them passing muster inside, like they're implementing a new piece of software that affects the company at a whole different level, right?
Right. Right.
And so those kinds of things just have to be. I mean, they're just part and parcel of what we have to do in today's world.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and we very often will work very closely with IT teams, especially in larger corporate environments. They have obviously a very crucial job and a very important standing in the success of the company. No different than any other division or department within that company. But what I think we provide is that ability to stand an expert and potentially provide solutions, working with IT and working also with marketing as a way to accomplish maybe a little bit higher subset or goals that are different or outside what another piece of technology can provide. A lot of times when we're picking up a new technology, Um, that's not a light decision for us to make, because we have to we have to vet the technology. We have to make sure that it meets what we feel are enterprise level, battleship clad, zero failure type abilities, or else we're not even going to begin to think about suggesting that to a client to use, for example. There's a lot that we have to do. And then we obviously, as a company, have to invest in becoming masters of that technology from our production team, so that they then have that ability to then work with their clients. So there's a very large process that we have to go through on our side for us to develop something. It's not something that we did, by any stretch of the imagination, do overnight. But usually where that ends up, and where I was going with this, is that we usually then are also working from a reseller or a channel partnership or something like that with the technologies that we work with. And that usually allows us to then offer an ability to do almost like a proof of concept or a test case event or something like that with our clients, using that technology, using it in the best possible way to see whether or not it's going to be a solution for the company and what their needs. And that then allows our clients to really see how it works, how it's going to fit. How does it work with the IT? If we've defined the IP address range, so that we know we can get a streaming signal in, for example, without that client needing to go through and actually license a product themselves, or make a massive commitment financially. We can help to avoid that, and we can make sure that we're doing it and we're getting off on the right step. And I hear from a lot of people all the time that is a massive, massive benefit that, again, comes from that whole idea of not trying to fit the square peg in the round hole analogy, with webinars and streaming events. We can change that, and we can make it better.
Yeah. Let me put an exclamation point on one thing that you just said, because I think you said it better than me. But working around and working with IT are not mutually exclusive, right? It's a big difference between IT giving you the blessing to say, yes, it's okay to use that vendor. They pass our security standards with that platform and that process and that kind of thing. It's very different than them implementing something.
Yes.
Not the least of which is also because sometimes enterprise platforms aren't cheap. And to your point, you can get the whole caboodle through us, and it's literally pennies on the dollar instead of signing an annual contract for a few $100,000 or whatever the commitment is. And so we're happy to work with IT, and we're happy to let them under the covers and know exactly that's part and parcel, particularly since we do a lot of work with financial services, healthcare, legal, people that have, significant legal ramifications for how they do or don't protect data. So
exactly. Yep. I think that's exactly correct. Yep.
So forward leaning, where's it going?
Yeah. Wow. Well, again, getting back to our market being heavily influenced, obviously, by innovations, COVID was, as everything, a massive, massive influencer in our market. And the inevitable proliferation, that's the word, of technologies and platforms and stuff, during COVID, when everyone was needing to do virtual events, and many had no experience in that world prior to that point. I think I saw, once a week there's a new platform out, and just crazy amounts of innovation. There's without a doubt, there's going to be some attrition of that. There's going to be a little bit of a consolidation of thoughts and features and stuff like that are going to be kind of in this next generation. I didn't mean to interrupt you though. What were you gonna say there?
No, I was just going to affirm. Yes. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Aaron and I have looked at each other and gone, really? The world needs another webinar platform?
There's that. Yeah, no, clearly they don't, and I think that's exactly where, it's that whole idea of markets being laggards to what is happening in our society. And there was just such a massive push. It's now consolidating. And so, interesting to see where that's at. I do think as well, a lot of the, I'll say, traditional large players in our market, they have their work cut out for them, because that's another thing that COVID has provided is financially, it's provided a viable and sometimes very profitable ability for new technologies to be pushed out and to be tried and potentially to be adopted. And so what we're seeing on our side is a lot of these larger, more established players of the market are really having to get really smart and move really quick, because the market has evolved years in a very short amount of time. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be interesting. There could very well be some attrition even in the larger players, kind of combining down and becoming more streamlined to fit where the market is. I think there's also, we talk about augmented reality, which is, the ability to virtually place things in, where you're actually being. That's interesting. Virtual reality, augmented reality, virtual reality being more like the meta universe, things like that. That's interesting. All of those have pitfalls, all of those have things that I think we need to kind of be a little bit wary of, and making sure that the technology doesn't get in front of the messaging. It's always what we're looking at, but those are things that I think are going to continue to drive and push things forward in our market.
I don't know that this analogy had come to mind before, but I'll just throw this out as we kind of wrap. But I think about it perhaps like, say, Apple or Microsoft, who have this core set of functionality, and then they know that all these little companies out there do innovations and can run rings around them in terms of time to market with cool things, which is part of why there's this extension of the universe via other apps and service providers, right? And one of those places, in fact, you know what? I'm even just going to call an audible and say, when you look at that list on the left-hand side, we cover different use cases, but also like what we think of as special touches. One of those things that frequently touches down for us in working with clients is what we just call those special touches. How do we accomplish this without pulling up a vendor that has some fly-by-night whose data policy would never pass muster with a Fortune 500 bank or something like that?
Totally.
And I think it's really useful to think, part of that ecosystem is going to continue to push the market forward, because little vendors can go innovate more quickly than Microsoft, Cisco, et cetera, et cetera. That's just the nature of big versus little. At the same time, one of the ways that you often be able to pull that kind of thing off in the context of isn't by going and using some vendor's software that you've never heard of. It's by using process and services to accomplish a similar tactic or goal.
Yeah.
By saying, how do we accomplish this aspect of creating a great customer experience or end user experience, without having to introduce some app from the App Store to our IT department and having them laugh us out of the room.
You have hit it on the head. Exactly right. Yeah.
So final thought on just reaffirming the value of platform agnosticism and maybe what to look for in a vendor.
As always, I definitely love our conversations, Roger, because I think that it allows us to really get to a pretty good level of why these things are important to us and why they're important to our clients. And I do think that when I think about us as a company, that agnosticism, for lack of a better word, is the core, one of the core foundations, principles that we have lived upon for the 13 years that V2 at least has been a company and been doing this. There's never going to be a one size fits all. There's never going to be hey, this is the platform that I'm going to use for my in-person focus groups as well as my, company CEO. You might be able to pull that off, but it's not going to be to the effect and to the advantage that you truly need it to be. So having someone in your back pocket that knows the ins and outs, that potentially can provide that technology, that can make sure that what you are using is going to be used in a zero failure type of a design. That's where I really feel like we have the strength of that and that market breadth to be able to understand where the market is even going, like you were just mentioning a minute ago. I think those are pretty significant benefits that we provide to our clients. And Again, it focuses on that very basic definition that we know there's not one right solution for everything, and it grows from there.
Well, with that, let me point out two things. One, you will see Aaron's email and phone number, direct phone number, both on the screen. But also, if you go to our website, virtualvenues.com, you'll find that our direct contact info is there. And the good news is we're big enough to handle big companies and small enough to handle you personally, which is a really important aspect in this particular industry, because you can go anywhere and get a telephone operator who can push a couple buttons, but aren't really going to help you think through strategy and turning strategy into tactics. And that's one of the things that we would hope to bring to the table for you. Here's one thing to maybe think about it. It's part of our ethos, and maybe one way to think about it for you is what we call plus one. You know, in the upcoming event where we talk about future stuff, we'll talk about VR and AI and LMNOP and a bunch of stuff that kind of is forward leaning. But at the end of the day, sometimes you only need to do one little thing new or different to have your boss go, whoa, what was that? That's cool. We didn't even, because they don't experience that in their day-to-day meetings of using Zoom, WebEx, GoTo, or whatever you're using for day-to-day meetings. And that one little, we call it a plus one. And maybe you can call it a plus one too. How do you get that plus one? So as we are thinking forward and leaning forward into where are things going and how can we look at the big picture on your behalf, a big chunk of that is actually going, all right, and now what can we do next month for you?
Yeah.
And that's the plus one, because it only takes one little thing to totally differentiate your webinar or virtual event or hybrid event from the way somebody else does that. So with that, I want to thank my friend and the Virtual Venues co-founder and CEO, Aaron, for yet another awesome discussion. And believe it or not, and thank you if you're still listening, believe it or not, we could have gone for hours more. That's part of the problem with being in this for a long time. Part of the power of dialogue, when you show up and just have a real dialogue instead of try to read a website, and give us a shout, and we're happy to talk through that with you. So with that, hope the rest of your day is a good one, and we will catch you next time around.